My name is Mia Harrison. I'm 34, and this happened in the fall of 2023. I had been feeling the wear of city life, its endless rush and relentless noise, and when my friend suggested an RV trip into the Catskill Mountains near Caterskill Falls, I couldn't say no. I craved the solitude of nature, a break from the constant buzz of urban life, and the promise of clear skies and quiet trails was irresistible. Our group consisted of 4 people with very different outlooks on life. Ryan Carter, with his quick wit and unyielding skepticism, was the one who always insisted there was a rational explanation for every odd occurrence. Then there was Jazz Lopez, whom we affectionately called Jazz, a sensitive and spiritual soul who had encountered strange happenings before and believed that nature itself held secrets beyond our understanding. And finally, Ethan Brooks, our ever-anxious safety officer, who obsessively checked every piece of equipment and fretted over every potential mishap. I had taken on the role of organizer and de facto leader, hoping that my practical nature and calm determination would hold us together as we ventured into unknown territory. We set out on a crisp October morning, the leaves just beginning to turn into brilliant hues of red and gold. Our RV, a slightly weathered but reliable motorhome, rumbled along winding roads as we left behind the familiar chaos of the city. Our destination was Caterskill Falls, a place renowned not only for its breathtaking beauty but also for its whispered legends and eerie history. The plan was simple: spend a few days exploring the area, enjoy some hikes, and let nature work its restorative magic on our tired souls. The journey was smooth at first. We arrived at a clearing near the falls late in the afternoon, just as the sun began to dip below the horizon. I parked the RV in a small wooded spot that promised seclusion. While Ethan immediately set to work securing our campsite and checking our gear, Ryan joked about how haunted the place looked, his sarcasm a thin veil over a hint of nervousness. Jazz, meanwhile, wandered off toward the edge of the woods, her eyes shining with a mix of excitement and quiet trepidation, as if she were drawn to some unseen force. That first night, we gathered around a modest campfire outside the RV. The flames danced and cast flickering shadows on the surrounding trees. I remember feeling an inexplicable chill, even though the fire provided warmth. It was then that I first noticed the odd stillness of the forest. Usually, the nighttime chorus of crickets and rustling leaves filled the air, but tonight, there was an uncanny silence. And then, as if from nowhere, came a soft, distant laughter, childlike yet twisted and hollow. I exchanged uneasy glances with Ryan and Jazz. Ethan's face, lit by the firelight, betrayed his mounting anxiety. Ryan scoffed at first. "It's probably just the wind playing tricks on us," he said, trying to brush off the eerie sound. But Jazz's eyes were wide with recognition, and she whispered, "That isn't the wind. It's the echo of something old, something that never should be disturbed." I wasn't sure what to make of it, but a deep instinct told me that something wasn't right. The next morning, after a restless night filled with strange dreams and uneasy murmurs from the dark, I stepped out of the RV to find that our generator had mysteriously failed. Ethan knelt beside it, muttering about a blown fuse or perhaps a fault in the wiring. His frustration was palpable as he fumbled through his limited toolkit in the cool morning air. While the technical issue was a minor setback, it compounded the tension that had already been simmering among us. I decided to take a short walk along a nearby trail to clear my head, but as I ventured away from the safety of the RV's light, I noticed something that made my heart pound. Large, elongated footprints encircled the vehicle, pressed into the soft earth as though some enormous creature had circled us during the night. The prints were disturbingly human in shape, yet carried an animalistic quality that defied explanation. I called the others over, and as we examined them, our earlier doubts about the laughter and silence came rushing back. Ryan, ever the pragmatist, insisted they were likely the result of a local animal. "Maybe a bear or a large dog," he reasoned, though his tone wavered slightly. Jazz knelt down, her fingers lightly brushing over the prints, and murmured, "This is no ordinary creature. It's as if something was stalking us while we slept." Ethan's eyes darted nervously between us, and I could sense the group's cohesion beginning to fray. Later that day, our discussion grew heated. Ryan's insistence on a rational explanation clashed with Jazz's growing conviction that we were meddling with forces beyond our control. I tried to mediate, reminding us that our goal had been to enjoy a break from our stressful lives. But as the day wore on and the atmosphere grew heavier with each unexplained event, our doubts festered into genuine fear. That evening, after a quick tension-filled meal hastily prepared in the cramped kitchenette of the RV, we decided to set up a more secure perimeter around our campsite. The earlier incident with the generator left us vulnerable, and Ethan's constant checks only added to our collective anxiety. I found myself double-checking the locks on the RV doors, while Ryan was busy trying to rationalize the strange occurrences with humor, a coping mechanism that seemed increasingly out of place. As night fell once more, the forest around us took on an even more foreboding aspect. The wind whispered through the trees in a way that almost sounded like soft, mournful voices. We huddled around the flickering campfire, our eyes straining to penetrate the darkness beyond its glow. It was then that I caught sight of a shadow moving at the edge of the light, a pale, shifting figure that seemed to merge with the surrounding darkness. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but as it drew closer, I recognized its features were disturbingly ambiguous. In one fleeting moment, it appeared as the silhouette of a small, childlike figure, and in the next, its form stretched into something grotesquely contorted, reminiscent of the legends of the Wendigo from Algonquian lore. I felt a cold dread seize my heart. "Did you see that?" I whispered urgently to Jazz, who nodded slowly, her eyes brimming with an unspoken fear. Ryan tried to laugh it off, but even his voice lacked conviction. Ethan, on the other hand, began checking the locks again, his hands trembling as he mumbled about something moving out there. Unable to shake the feeling of being watched, I decided to step away from the group for a moment and check the perimeter on my own. The night was thick with tension as I moved cautiously between the trees, every crack of a twig underfoot sending shivers down my spine. I kept thinking about Jazz's words, about the forest being alive with secrets and ancient forces that defied our understanding. The more I thought about it, the more I began to feel that this was no ordinary camping trip gone awry. Something ancient and malevolent had been disturbed, and it was watching us with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. As I made my way back to the RV, I heard a sudden gust of wind that was stronger than any natural breeze in the Catskills. It howled through the trees, and in that moment, the fire was nearly snuffed out, plunging our immediate area into near darkness. When I finally rejoined my friends, I saw that their faces were etched with terror. Ryan's earlier bravado had evaporated, and even his rational mind seemed shaken by the inexplicable events of the night. The next day brought no relief. If anything, the tension only grew thicker. We attempted to continue with our planned hike to explore the falls, hoping that daylight might drive away the supernatural chill that had settled over us. But the further we ventured into the rugged terrain, the more the landscape itself seemed to conspire against us. The winding trails turned muddy and treacherous, and each step felt as though we were being drawn deeper into an invisible trap. During our hike, I found myself separated from the group for a few agonizing minutes. The forest was silent except for my own rapid breathing and the crunch of leaves underfoot. Then, as I rounded a bend near a cluster of ancient pines, I came face to face with that same unsettling figure. It stood motionless, half hidden in the shadows, its eyes reflecting a haunting emptiness. For a long moment, neither of us moved. I swear I could see the sorrow and malice in those eyes, a silent testimony to a past that was both tragic and terrifying. Before I could react, the figure melted back into the darkness, leaving me trembling and breathless. When I finally rejoined Ryan, Jazz, and Ethan, I recounted what I had seen, my voice barely a whisper. Ryan tried to dismiss it with another wry comment about our imaginations running wild, but Jazz's expression was one of grave concern. "This isn't just a figment of our fear," she said softly. "Something in this forest is reaching out to us, and it's not done." That night, as we huddled inside the RV with its failing generator providing only intermittent warmth, the supernatural presence seemed to intensify. The laughter of children returned, closer and more insistent than before, echoing through the Dark corridors of the forest. Objects in the RV began to shift inexplicably. A flashlight that I had left on the table would be found in a different corner the next morning, and Ethan's meticulously arranged toolkit was in disarray, as if rummaged through by invisible hands. My sleep was fitful and broken by dreams of ghostly children and twisted figures that stalked me relentlessly. In one particularly vivid nightmare, I found myself standing before a mirror in a dimly lit room, watching as my own reflection contorted into a hideous visage, its eyes pleading for release. I woke up drenched in sweat, the echoes of whispered voices still lingering in the silence of the RV. It was on the third night that the situation escalated to a point of no return. Ryan, who had been our pillar of rationality until now, insisted on venturing out to investigate a series of strange noises that seemed to emanate from the direction of a dense thicket. "We need to confront whatever is out there," he declared, his voice a mix of determination and desperation. Despite our protests, especially from Ethan, whose eyes were wide with dread, Ryan was adamant. He grabbed a flashlight and slipped out into the blackness, leaving us behind in a tense, silent vigil. We waited for what felt like an eternity, each minute stretching into an eternity of anxiety. Jazz sat close to me, her hand gripping mine tightly as she whispered incantations and prayers that had been passed down through generations. I tried to comfort her, though my own heart was heavy with foreboding. The minutes dragged on, and finally, we heard a blood-curdling scream that shattered the uneasy quiet. Ryan's scream, a sound that was both raw and final, echoed through the trees, followed by a sickening thud that made our blood run cold. I bolted out of the RV, my heart pounding in my ears, and found Ryan lying near a fallen tree, his face contorted in agony. It appeared he had been struck down by an unseen force, a violent push, as if the darkness itself had reached out and grabbed him. His eyes, wide with shock and pain, met mine for a brief moment before the light in them faded away. In that instant, all rational explanations fell away, replaced by a stark, horrifying reality. Something in these woods was not only real, but also deadly. The loss of Ryan shattered whatever semblance of normalcy we had left. We huddled together, grief and terror mingling in our cries for help that would never be answered by the silent forest. Ethan's usual nervous energy gave way to raw despair, and even Jazz, who had always embraced the spiritual mysteries of life, was overcome with sorrow and fear. I felt the weight of responsibility settle upon my shoulders like a millstone. I had led us here, and now I had to find a way to survive the wrath of whatever had claimed Ryan's life. Desperation forced us into a corner. Jazz, with tears streaming down her face, insisted that we needed to perform a purification ritual. There are ancient rites passed down from native traditions that speak of appeasing restless spirits, she said, her voice trembling with both hope and terror. Although I was skeptical, I had long since learned to trust Jazz's intuition when it came to matters beyond our understanding. With nowhere else to turn, we gathered what little we had, a few items we found in the RV, some candles that Ethan miraculously managed to salvage from a malfunctioning cooler, and a battered journal that Jazz claimed contained fragments of an old ritual. We retreated to the spot where we had first heard the eerie laughter, a clearing that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy under the light of a waning moon. There, under Jazz's guidance, we arranged the items in a circle, our voices rising in a chorus of ancient words that none of us fully understood. I led the incantation, my voice trembling as I recited lines that I prayed would not summon further wrath. The air grew thick with a palpable tension, and the shadows around us deepened into swirling shapes that seemed to writhe with malice. For a long moment, nothing happened except the rustle of leaves and the distant, mournful hum of the forest. Then, as if in response to our plea, a violent gust of wind erupted from nowhere, toppling the makeshift circle and sending our candles flickering wildly. In that chaotic moment, the presence that had tormented us all night made its final, brutal move. The forest around us exploded into a frenzy of movement, a cacophony of shrieking wind, crashing branches, and a force that seemed intent on erasing our very existence. I felt a searing pain in my side as something invisible struck me, and I stumbled, my vision blurring as I tried to catch sight of the source. Shadows coalesced into a towering, twisted figure, a grotesque fusion of childlike innocence and monstrous hunger. Its eyes glowed with a baleful light, and its form shifted between that of a gaunt skeletal apparition and a twisted feral creature. I could hear Jazz's frantic cries and see Ethan crouched low behind a fallen log, his face pale as he clutched a salvaged tool as if it were a weapon. Amid the chaos, the supernatural force swept toward us with terrifying purpose. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline surging through me as I grabbed what little I could and fought against the overwhelming terror. The entity's presence was not merely a passive haunting, it was violent, destructive, and undeniably malevolent. In the ensuing struggle, our makeshift circle was shattered, and the very ground seemed to buckle under the force of its assault. I tried to shield Jazz and Ethan, calling out to them to run, but the disorienting mix of fear and loss left us all paralyzed for precious seconds that stretched into an eternity. I remember one final moment with Ryan, a flash of recognition in his eyes as he reached out toward me from the darkness before he was swallowed by the violent current of the supernatural assault. His death, sudden and inexplicable, was the catalyst that drove our desperate resolve. In the chaotic melee, I managed to force my trembling voice to continue the ritual, even as the entity's rage roared around us. The incantation, born from a blend of ancient lore and our collective desperation, seemed to draw a line in the fabric of the night. Slowly, impossibly, the monstrous presence began to recoil, its form wavering as if hit by a tidal wave of our combined will. The wind subsided, and an oppressive silence fell once more over the clearing. The entity retreated, leaving behind a landscape scarred by its fury and a group of survivors forever changed by its wrath. We gathered together, our hearts heavy with grief for Ryan and the knowledge that we had narrowly escaped a fate too horrible to comprehend. In the days that followed, we struggled to make sense of what had transpired. The forest around Caterskill Falls retained its eerie stillness as though it were a silent witness to our terror. The RV, with its failed generator and other malfunctions, had become both a refuge and a reminder of how fragile our safety had been. Ethan, whose anxiety had always been a burden, was now a quiet, haunted shell of himself, his eyes distant and filled with regret. Jazz, normally so vibrant and full of faith, often sat for hours staring into the distance, murmuring soft prayers as if trying to atone for our intrusion into something ancient and forbidden. As for me, I bore the burden of leadership and loss with a mix of determination and sorrow. I kept a detailed journal of our ordeal, recording every chilling detail in the hope that one day our story might serve as a warning to others who sought solace in the wilderness. I knew that the forest had not been entirely pacified, that the malevolent force we had encountered still lingered, waiting for the next soul to disturb its dark slumber. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still hear the echo of that ghostly laughter, feel the cold touch of unseen hands, and see the twisted visage of the entity that tore Ryan from our midst. The experience left me with scars that no time could heal, and a deep-seated respect for the forces that dwell in the shadows of nature. I continue to live with the memory of that night, a constant reminder that some parts of this world are better left undisturbed. The forest, with its ancient secrets and sorrowful echoes, remains a realm where the line between myth and reality is perilously thin, and where every step taken in its depths is a step into the unknown. In the aftermath, I found myself compelled to share our story, not as a tale of horror for mere entertainment, but as a cautionary account of what happens when human curiosity collides with forces beyond our understanding. I've since returned to the city, the memories of Caterskill Falls etched permanently into my mind. Yet, despite the trauma and the irrevocable loss of a dear friend, I have also learned that confronting our deepest fears is sometimes the only way to reclaim the parts of ourselves that we thought were lost forever. Every so often, I receive letters and messages from people who claim to have experienced similar encounters in the remote backwoods of New York. They speak of ghostly apparitions, inexplicable laughter echoing through deserted trails, and a pervasive sense of being watched by something not of this world. These stories serve as a grim reminder that the supernatural is not confined to the pages of folklore or the realms of our imagination. It is real, lurking in the quiet corners of our world, waiting for an opportunity to manifest. My nights are now filled with dreams of those long, dark hours by the campfire, the whispered incantations, the desperate struggle against a force that defied reason, and the final, agonizing loss of Ryan. I have come to accept that while we may try to explain the unexplainable with science and logic, there are realms of existence that lie beyond our comprehension. The wild places of this earth harbor mysteries that have been safeguarded through countless generations, and sometimes our intrusion into these sacred spaces awakens ancient guardians who do not take kindly to our presence. Even as I write these words, a part of me remains on that mist-shrouded trail in the Catskills, still listening for that distant laughter, still feeling the cold brush of a spectral hand in the darkness. I know that the forest is not done with me, that its echoes will haunt me for the rest of my days, and while I have tried to move forward with my life, the memories of that cursed night continue to serve as both a warning and a testament to the unfathomable power of nature's hidden realms. I have learned that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it head-on, even when that fear comes in the form of ancient, vengeful spirits. The journey we undertook in the Catskills was meant to be an escape, a brief respite from the relentless pace of modern life. Instead, it became a battle for survival against an otherworldly force that defied explanation, one that demanded our respect and instilled in us a terror that still lingers like a shadow at the edge of every memory. Ryan's death remains the darkest chapter of our ordeal, a stark reminder that no one is immune to the cruelty of the unknown. In the aftermath of that final confrontation, as we huddled together in silence amid the shattered remnants of our ritual, I made a silent vow to honor his memory by never forgetting the lessons that the forest had taught us. We must always tread carefully in the realms of the supernatural, for there are some forces that should never be provoked. Now, as I live with the scars of that fateful trip, I find solace in the quiet moments of reflection and in the understanding that our experiences, though horrific, have left an indelible mark on my soul. The forest of Caterskill Falls is a place of wild beauty and ancient power, a reminder that nature is not always benign, and that its mysteries are as deep and unfathomable as the darkness between the stars. I continue to write, to share, and to warn others of the hidden perils that await those who dare to venture too far into the unknown. And while the memory of that night will forever haunt me, it also fuels a quiet determination to seek truth, even in the face of unimaginable horror. This is my story, a story of lost innocence, of nature's wrath, and of the enduring strength of the human spirit in the face of supernatural terror. I carry Ryan's memory with me, a silent, ever-present reminder that some encounters come at too high a price. And as I look back on that journey, I know that the forest will always whisper its secrets, waiting for the next soul brave enough or foolish enough to listen. In the end, the experience taught me that the world is far more mysterious and dangerous than we can ever truly understand. And while I have tried to move on, the echoes of that night continue to resonate within me, a constant reminder that some doors, once opened, are impossible to close again. My name is David Monroe. I'm 45, and this happened in the fall of 2023. After years of urban chaos and the relentless ache of personal loss, I decided to retreat into the solitude of nature. The city had worn me down, and I carried with me a heavy burden of grief and regret following the death of my beloved partner, Claire. I needed to escape, to find a place where I could be alone with my memories, and maybe, in the quiet of the wilderness, learn to forgive myself. I set out in my trusty, if battered, RV toward Adirondack Park in upstate New York. The vehicle was my sanctuary on wheels, a mobile refuge where I could retreat from the world and its unyielding pressures. I had mapped out a course that would take me along remote lakeside campsites and meandering forest roads. The destination was a secluded clearing by a quiet lake, a place reputed among locals for its eerie tranquility and the whispered legends of restless spirits. The journey started on a crisp October morning. I remember the golden light of dawn as it stretched across the horizon, and the sense of calm that filled me, if only for a moment. Driving through endless stretches of amber and red foliage, I let my mind wander back to happier times, though those memories were tinged with sorrow. I could still see Claire's smile, hear her gentle laugh, but the pain of her absence was an ever-present companion on this lonely road. Arriving at the lakeside clearing in the early afternoon, I felt a cautious relief. The RV rolled to a stop on a gravel driveway that disappeared into the dark embrace of the surrounding woods. I set up camp with deliberate care, aligning my meager belongings, checking my equipment, and making sure the generator was working. Yet almost immediately I noticed that something was off. As I fired up the generator, a series of small sparks and a persistent flicker of light suggested that the electrical system was not as reliable as it once had been. I shrugged it off as a minor inconvenience. After all, I was far from home, and expected a few glitches. That first evening, I sat by the RV's small campfire, the flames dancing in the crisp autumn air. The silence was profound, punctuated only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. It was then that I tuned the radio, hoping to catch a familiar station to ease the solitude. Instead, the dial picked up nothing but intermittent static. As I listened intently, a voice emerged from the crackling noise, a voice that seemed to murmur fragments of conversations I couldn't quite decipher. The words were muffled and distant, but they stirred something deep within me, a vague sense of forewarning. I fiddled with the dial, trying to stabilize the signal, but the mysterious messages persisted, echoing through the static like lost memories. Later that night, as I lay in the narrow confines of my RV, I awoke to a strange sensation. I couldn't tell if it was the chill of the encroaching night or something else entirely, but the atmosphere felt heavy, charged with a presence that I couldn't shake. Glancing out the window, I noticed cryptic symbols etched in a fine, almost imperceptible line on the windshield. I wasn't sure if it was my imagination or a deliberate act by some unseen hand. The symbols, curved lines, interlocking shapes, seemed almost ritualistic, as if meant to ward off or perhaps summon something. My heart pounded as I sat there, staring at them in the dim light, wondering if I had inadvertently entered into a realm where ancient forces held sway. The next morning, I decided to leave the RV for a short walk along one of the forest paths that skirted the lake. The air was cool and filled with the scent of pine, and for a brief moment I felt a fragile sense of normalcy returning. Yet as I walked, I couldn't help but feel that I was being watched. My footsteps echoed on the soft earth, and every snap of a twig underfoot heightened my alertness. Then, in a clearing bordered by towering oak trees, I caught a glimpse of something that made my breath hitch. For an instant, a shadow flitted between the trees, a figure that moved with an unnatural fluidity. In that fleeting moment, the silhouette bore an uncanny resemblance to Claire. I froze, heart pounding, as I strained to discern any familiar features, but the figure melted into the darkness before I could get a proper look. Was it a trick of the light? Or perhaps a manifestation of my grief? I wasn't sure, and the uncertainty gnawed at me as I hurried back to the RV. Back at camp, I inspected my surroundings with a heightened sense of paranoia. Every creak and rustle seemed to carry a hidden meaning. The generator's intermittent hum mingled with the wind, creating an almost rhythmic backdrop to my mounting anxiety. I sat at the small table inside the RV, journaling my thoughts in the hope that putting them into words might dispel the growing unease. But as I scribbled furiously, the radio suddenly burst back to life with the same eerie static and mysterious voice. It was as if the device itself was trying to communicate a message I couldn't decipher but felt was meant solely for me. That afternoon, while trying to fix the generator with the limited tools at my disposal, I noticed something even stranger. As I stepped outside to get a better look, my eyes caught sight of a series of faint, almost luminescent symbols drawn in the dirt near the RV. They were similar in design to those on the windshield, almost as if someone or something had deliberately left them behind. My mind raced. Was this a warning? A curse? or merely the product of my weary imagination? I attempted to rationalize the signs, attributing them to local pranksters or natural erosion. But deep down, I knew that the solitude of the woods was beginning to fray the edges of my sanity. Night fell again, and with it came an oppressive darkness that seemed to swallow up the light from my feeble campfire. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves and creating eerie, almost mournful sounds that echoed through the trees. I sat huddled inside the RV, the old radio casting sporadic, ghostly messages that I couldn't decipher. The isolation was complete, and I found myself sinking deeper into a state of introspection that was both painful and necessary. Memories of Claire intermingled with the unsettling sounds and symbols that haunted my camp, blurring the line between the living and the dead, the rational and the supernatural. In the midst of these quiet terrors, I began experiencing vivid dreams. In one, I was back in the city with Claire, but everything was distorted. Colors were too bright, voices too shrill, and the streets twisted into labyrinthine paths. In another, I found myself walking along a moonlit path by the lake, only to be confronted by a spectral figure whose eyes bore the sorrow and intensity of all my unspoken regrets. Each dream left me shaken, as if the boundary between my subconscious and the world outside was thinning. I decided that I could no longer endure the creeping dread alone. The next day, I took a trip into a small town near the park to grab some supplies and perhaps find answers. At a rustic diner off a weathered highway, I met an old trucker named Hank, whose weather-beaten face seemed to carry decades of wisdom and hardship. Over a cup of strong coffee, Hank told me a local legend, a story of a spirit said to prey on those burdened by grief. According to Hank, this spectral presence roamed the isolated roads of the Adirondacks, seeking to ensnare lost souls and feed on their sorrow. He spoke in a low, gravelly tone, and though I tried to maintain my skepticism, the details of his tale resonated with the eerie signs I had witnessed. As I left the diner, Hank's words echoed in my mind. I couldn't help but recall a faded newspaper clipping I had found tucked behind the RV's door, a clipping detailing mysterious disappearances and eerie sightings near the very lake where I was now camped. The article mentioned unexplained phenomena and incidents that defied conventional explanation, deepening my conviction that I was not alone in my torment. That night, the line between reality and hallucination blurred further. I sat inside the RV, the small space closing in around me as the generator sputtered and died again, plunging me into darkness. The radio remained silent for long stretches, and when it did come back on, the mysterious voice spoke in disjointed phrases that left me with a sense of foreboding. I tried to calm my racing thoughts by writing in my journal, but the words on the page twisted and distorted, reflecting back at me as if under a malevolent influence. Sleep came fitfully, tormented by nightmares that merged my inner anguish with the supernatural occurrences outside. I dreamt of walking along a path by the lake, only to see the specter of Claire, her face both comforting and horrifyingly distorted by sorrow. In these dreams, her eyes seemed to beg for forgiveness, for understanding, and for release from the pain that had bound me so tightly. I awoke each time drenched in sweat, heart pounding as if trying to escape the confines of my own guilt. On the fourth night, I decided that I could no longer ignore the pull of the unknown. With the full moon hanging low in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the lake, I resolved to venture out on my own. Something deep within me, a mix of desperation and a need for closure, urged me toward the water's edge. I packed a small flashlight and my journal, and leaving the relative safety of the RV, I walked along a narrow, winding path that led toward the lake. The air was cool and still, and the forest around me seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. As I approached the lake, the mist began to rise off the surface, cloaking everything in a ghostly pallor. The water, usually calm and inviting, now appeared as a dark, endless void. I stopped at the edge, feeling the crunch of leaves beneath my feet and the weight of unseen eyes upon me. Then, from the depths of the mist, a figure emerged. For a moment, I could scarcely believe my eyes. The spectral form bore an uncanny resemblance to Claire, her features softened by an ethereal glow. But as the figure drew nearer, I saw that her eyes were not the warm, familiar ones I remembered. They were hollow and brimming with sorrow, as if reflecting every regret and unspoken word between us. I stood frozen, torn between the desire to reach out and the instinct to flee. The apparition's presence was both a balm and a torment. It stirred memories of love and loss, and yet it exuded an undeniable menace. The figure seemed to waver between the comforting visage of the woman I had lost and something altogether darker, a being that embodied the very essence of my guilt and despair. I felt as though I were staring into the mirror of my own soul, witnessing every secret regret and every unhealed wound. In that moment, the line between the supernatural and my own tortured psyche dissolved. I whispered, "Claire?" in a trembling voice, desperate for some semblance of reality. The figure's face flickered, and for an instant, I saw not the beloved image I longed for, but a twisted, contorted mask of grief and anger. A gust of wind whipped across the lake, carrying with it a cacophony of whispered voices, snatches of conversation, desperate pleas, and sorrowful laments that seemed to emanate from every direction. The spectral figure advanced, its eyes burning with a fierce intensity that both beckoned and repelled me. I took a step back, my heart pounding so fiercely that I feared it might shatter. The entity hovered at the edge of the mist, its form indistinct, and shifting as though it were made of smoke and regret. The spectral Claire seemed to speak without words, a silent imploration to confront the demons I had long buried. In that silent confrontation, I realized that this apparition was not merely an external force. It was a manifestation of every ounce of pain I had refused to face, a relentless specter of guilt that had haunted me since Claire's passing. Tears welled in my eyes as I sank to my knees on the cold, damp ground. I knew that if I were to move forward, I had to confront the ghosts of my past, both literal and metaphorical. With trembling determination, I opened my journal and began to write, pouring out every regret, every sorrow, and every apology I had ever held within. The words flowed from me as if they were the key to unlocking a long-forgotten part of my soul. The spectral presence loomed closer, and I could feel its weight, not as a physical blow, but as an emotional force, pushing me toward a reckoning with my own inner darkness. For what felt like hours, I sat there on the edge of the lake, baring my soul to the night. The wind carried away my confessions as if cleansing the weight of my burden, and slowly, the spectral figure began to recede, dissolving into the mist. The air cleared, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted ever so slightly, leaving behind an unsettling calm. I knew then that the encounter was not a final goodbye, but a necessary confrontation, a painful, yet cathartic moment that might finally allow me to begin the long journey towards self-forgiveness. I returned to the RV with a heavy but resolute heart. The generator sputtered back to life as if acknowledging the shift in the air, and the mysterious static on the radio faded into an intermittent murmur. Over the next few days, I found that the signs of supernatural activity gradually diminished. The cryptic symbols were no longer appearing with such frequency, and the strange messages on the radio became less insistent, as if the force that had tormented me was receding into the background of my own mind. Each morning, I took long walks by the lake, allowing the gentle lapping of water against the shore to soothe my battered spirit. I spent hours writing in my journal, documenting every detail of the past few days, each odd malfunction of the RV, each whisper of wind, each fleeting glimpse of a figure in the darkness. The experience was surreal, merging the tangible world of malfunctioning equipment and failing radios with the intangible realm of memories and dreams. I began to understand that the supernatural events were not solely the work of some malevolent spirit, but also a mirror of my own inner turmoil. My grief had taken physical form, manifesting as a presence that haunted the secluded roads and silent lakes of Adirondack Park. By the time I packed up the RV and prepared to leave, a quiet acceptance had settled over me. I realized that while I might never completely escape the memories of Claire or the guilt that had long plagued me, I had taken a vital step toward healing by confronting those inner demons. The haunted highways and the spectral encounter by the lake had forced me to acknowledge the pain I had buried for so long, and in doing so, had granted me a sliver of redemption. Driving away from the secluded lakeside clearing, I felt a bittersweet mix of relief and lingering sorrow. The road stretched out before me like an uncertain promise, but for the first time in years, I felt a cautious optimism stirring within my heart. I had faced the darkest corners of my past, and though the memories would never fully fade, they no longer held the same paralyzing power over me. The supernatural presence that had haunted those lonely nights was, in many ways, a reflection of the grief I had carried, and by confronting it, I had begun to lay that burden to rest. Even now, as I continue my solitary journeys across the winding highways and hidden trails of this vast country, I carry with me the lessons learned on that fateful trip. I know that sometimes the most formidable ghosts are not those that roam in the dead of night, but the ones that reside within our own hearts. And while the Adirondack forests and quiet lakes may still harbor secrets and spectral echoes of a time long past, I have come to understand that healing begins when we dare to face our inner darkness, no matter how terrifying that confrontation may be. This journey was not a miraculous cure for my sorrow, but it was a necessary step toward reclaiming my life. As I continue to travel, I find solace in the knowledge that even in the bleakest moments, there is the possibility of redemption, if only we are brave enough to confront the shadows within. My name is David Monroe, and though I still feel the ache of loss with every mile I travel, I now drive forward with a renewed resolve to live, to learn, and to forgive. Not only the world for its cruelty, but also myself, for the burdens I have carried for far too long. My name is Sophie Harper. I'm 28, and this happened in the autumn of 2023. I had just left behind the ruins of a painful breakup and the heavy burden of a family history shrouded in secrets, and I needed a fresh start, a new canvas to capture both beauty and truth. As an independent photographer and aspiring writer, I craved inspiration, and the rugged splendor of New York's Finger Lakes promised just that. I rented an old RV and set my course for the windswept shores of Seneca Lake, determined to leave behind the echoes of my past and confront the mysteries that had long hovered at the edges of my life. The drive was a mix of liberation and melancholy. The highway unfurled before me like a ribbon of possibility, bordered by brilliant autumn trees and reflective puddles from an early October rain. Every mile I left behind felt like shedding an old skin, painful but necessary. When I finally pulled off onto a narrow gravel road leading to a secluded lakeside clearing, I felt both excitement and trepidation. I parked my RV in a small open space fringed by ancient pines, their gnarled branches reaching out as if to guard long-forgotten secrets. The first day passed in a quiet, almost surreal calm. I set up my modest camp, unpacking my camera gear, a few notebooks, and some personal keepsakes that tied me to both my lost love and my mysterious lineage. I even took a moment to admire the gentle lapping of Seneca Lake's dark waters, a surface that shimmered with reflections of fiery leaves in a bruised sky. Despite the natural beauty around me, a subtle tension pricked at the edges of my awareness, a sense that I was not entirely alone, that something unseen was watching. Curiosity, mixed with a professional instinct for capturing unusual stories, drove me to explore the nearby woods that afternoon. As I ambled along a narrow, leaf-strewn path, my footsteps muffled by layers of fallen leaves, I chanced upon an old farmhouse hidden behind a stand of towering pines. The building was nearly swallowed by time, its paint peeled away in ragged strips, windows clouded with dust, and a sagging porch that whispered of better days. Drawn inexplicably to it, I hesitated only a moment before pushing open the creaking door. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something ancient and lingering. Dim light filtered through broken windows, casting long shadows across faded wallpaper and creaking floorboards. In one corner of the dilapidated living room, I discovered a small wooden chest, its surface etched with swirling, almost ritualistic symbols. My heart quickened when I opened it to reveal a tattered journal and a collection of odd relics. A rusted key, a dried sprig of what looked like sage, and several pages of handwritten notes filled with cryptic sketches and archaic symbols. I spent the next hour poring over the journal by the soft light of my camera's screen. The entries were dated back to the early 1900s and chronicled the activities of a coven of witches who once called this region home. The author wrote of secret rituals, dark incantations, and a series of events that culminated in a tragedy at a place they referred to as Hemlock Hollow. The words hinted at curses born of injustice and sorrow, and as I read, a chill ran down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that these long-dead secrets were somehow intertwined with my own life. Whispers of a past that my mother had never spoken of, and hints that perhaps my great-grandmother had been part of those very rituals. I left the farmhouse with the journal and relics tucked safely in my bag, my mind swirling with questions. That night, back at my RV, I arranged my small living space with deliberate care, setting the journal on a makeshift table next to a flickering oil lamp. As darkness enveloped the campsite, I began to hear faint, disembodied whispers carried on the wind. They were so soft at first that I dismissed them as my imagination, but soon the voices grew louder, echoing around the periphery of my small sanctuary. At times they sounded like fragments of a conversation in a language I couldn't understand. At others they seemed to murmur my name in tones that were both inviting and chilling. I lay awake on my narrow cot, the murmurs merging with the rustle of leaves outside, and found myself wondering if I had awakened something that should have remained undisturbed. Every so often a flash of movement caught my eye through the narrow window of the RV, a shadow that flitted across the darkened landscape, disappearing almost as soon as I noticed it. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, but deep down I knew that the air around Seneca Lake was thick with histories and hauntings. The following day brought little respite from the uneasy feeling that clung to me like a second skin. As I explored the lakeshore with my camera in hand, I began to capture images that defied explanation. In several shots, I noticed a spectral figure, a woman dressed in vintage attire, her face partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, drifting along the water's edge. At first, I assumed it was a trick of exposure or a stray reflection, but the figure appeared in multiple photos, each time with an expression of deep sorrow and longing. I began to suspect that this ghostly presence was not merely a figment of my imagination, but a remnant of a tortured past, perhaps even connected to the legacy I had discovered in the farmhouse. That evening, while I was sorting through the day's photographs back at the RV, the old generator sputtered and the lights began to flicker. My laptop, which I used to review my work, suddenly displayed brief, static-filled images of the same cryptic symbols from the journal. I tried rebooting the system, but the malfunctions continued, almost as if the RV itself was protesting my presence or trying to communicate something in its own mechanical language. The unsettling occurrences left me questioning if technology, like nature, could harbor mysteries beyond our understanding. Determined to seek answers, I decided to take a short trip into the nearby town the next morning. I drove into a small market town along the lakeshore, its streets quiet and its residents carrying an air of gentle weariness. There I met a kindly older gentleman named Mr. Bernard. His weathered face and soft, measured speech gave him the appearance of someone who had seen many winters in these parts. Over a cup of steaming coffee at a modest diner, I mentioned my experiences and the strange artifacts I had found. Mr. Bernard listened intently before leaning in and lowering his voice. Seneca Lake in these parts, he began slowly, are steeped in legends. There's talk of witch trials, of curses cast upon those who dared to defy fate. In a place they call Hemlock Hollow, many years ago, a terrible injustice was done. A coven was persecuted, and one of their own, a woman of great sorrow, swore a curse that has haunted these lands ever since. Folks say her spirit roams these shores searching for absolution, and sometimes she makes herself known to those with a heavy heart. I nodded, my mind racing back to the journal and the spectral images I had captured. Mr. Bernard's tale resonated with something deep inside me, a vague, almost forgotten memory of whispered family stories. He spoke of the curse as if it were as real as the ground beneath our feet, and though I remained skeptical in some part of me, I couldn't ignore the mounting evidence that my experience was entwined with these very legends. Returning to my RV, I felt a renewed sense of urgency. The whispers that had haunted my nights became more insistent, and the shadows that danced on the edge of my vision grew bolder. Every creak of the RV's frame, every flicker of the failing lights, seemed to be a reminder that I was treading on sacred ground, a boundary between the living and the long-forgotten. I spent hours poring over the journal, deciphering its cryptic passages and comparing the symbols to those that appeared on my malfunctioning devices. The more I learned, the more I began to suspect that the ghostly woman I had seen was not an unrelated apparition, but perhaps a key to unlocking a legacy that ran in my blood. In the deep of night, I would be roused from troubled sleep by vivid nightmares. I dreamed of a woman with tear-stained cheeks and eyes that burned with both fury and despair. In the dreams, she reached out to me as if pleading for help, her voice a blend of sorrow and accusation. Each morning I awoke drenched in sweat, the images of her face lingering like a warning. My sense of isolation grew, and I wondered if the spectral presence was a harbinger of doom or a desperate cry for liberation. Then came the stormy night that shattered the tenuous balance between my rational mind and the forces I had unwittingly stirred. The sky was a tumult of black clouds, and a fierce wind howled through the trees as rain pounded relentlessly against the RV's metal sides. I had spent the day reviewing the journal and attempting to trace the lineage hinted at in its pages, and by dusk I felt an inescapable pull to confront the unknown head-on. As the storm intensified, the RV's generator groaned and sputtered, plunging me into intermittent darkness. The whispers outside became almost deafening, and I sensed that the boundary between my inner turmoil and the supernatural was collapsing. I stepped outside into the lashing rain, the cold droplets mingling with the sweat on my brow. In the violent gusts of wind, I saw her, a full apparition of the spectral woman I had glimpsed in my photographs. There, in the clearing by Seneca Lake, she materialized as if emerging from the very mists of time. Her dress was anachronistic, flowing and stained with the hues of sorrow, and her eyes shone with a mixture of despair and wrath. The intensity of her gaze pinned me in place, and in that charged moment, the full weight of my family's hidden past bore down on me. The spirit's presence was overwhelming, a palpable force that seemed to warp the very air around us. I could almost feel centuries of injustice and unhealed grief emanating from her, as though every tear shed in forgotten trials had coalesced into this single, anguished form. She moved closer, her face shifting between the gentle contours of a grieving woman and the distorted mask of rage. In a voice that was both distant and immediate, she whispered words that I could not quite discern, but the tone was unmistakable, a plea for release and retribution. My mind raced as I recalled the passages in the journal that described a ritual meant to free a tormented spirit from an eternal curse. With trembling hands, I fumbled through my bag for the relics I had salvaged from the abandoned farmhouse. The rusted key, the dried sage, and the worn pages of the journal felt like tools meant for this very confrontation. In that moment, I realized that this was not merely a haunting but an invitation, a call to resolve the sins of the past, both hers and my own. Standing in the midst of the storm, I gathered my courage. The wind whipped around me as I opened the journal to a page marked with a faded sigil and a series of incantations written in an archaic hand. The words were barely legible, yet they resonated with an ancient power. With the rain lashing my face and the ghost's sorrowful eyes fixed upon me, I began to recite the incantations, my voice shaky at first, but gradually growing steadier as I poured every ounce of my heart into the ritual. The spectral woman watched in silence, her expression contorting between hope and anguish. The air around me grew thick, almost tangible, as if charged with the energy of uncounted years. I could feel the power of the words reverberating through the clearing, drawing forth a force that seemed to swirl in the darkness. The rain intensified, the sound of it mingling with the rising cadence of my incantation, until the whole world felt as if it were vibrating with an ancient, sorrowful hymn. Time seemed to slow as the ritual reached its climax. The ghost's form began to shimmer, And for a long, agonizing moment, I felt as though the universe was holding its breath. Then, as if a great weight was being lifted, the spectral figure's anguished cry softened into a mere whisper, a final, grateful exhale that echoed across the lapping waters of Seneca Lake. I continued the incantation until, slowly, the oppressive energy ebbed away and the spirit's image blurred, dissolving into the mist that had always been a part of this haunted place. In the immediate aftermath, the storm began to subside. The wind's fury gave way to a calm, almost reverent silence, and the incessant whispers that had plagued my nights faded into the gentle murmur of the lake's waters. I stood alone in the clearing, drenched and shivering, but with a deep sense of catharsis filling my being. I realized that the curse, the sorrow, the injustice, and the deep-seated grief that had once bound the spirit had been a mirror for my own hidden pain. Confronting it had not only freed her, but it had also allowed me to acknowledge the wounds I had long denied. Over the next few days, as the skies cleared and the oppressive atmosphere lifted, I found myself wandering the shores of Seneca Lake with a renewed sense of purpose. The RV, which had once been a vessel of isolation and malfunction, now felt like a safe haven, a bridge between my old life and the promise of healing. I spent long hours taking photographs of the tranquil water under a soft autumn sun, capturing images that were imbued with both melancholy and hope. Every shot, every written note in my journal became a testament to the transformative night when the past and present had collided in a torrent of emotion. I continued to study the relics in the journal, piecing together the fragmented story of the coven and the woman whose sorrow had haunted these lands for over a century. The clues suggested that the spirit had been wronged in a brutal injustice, a victim of circumstances that transcended time, and her pain had seeped into the very fabric of the region. I came to understand that the curse was not simply a supernatural malediction, but a living record of all the unspoken grief and suppressed truths of our shared history. And in a strange, almost poetic way, my own journey of heartbreak and rediscovery had become entwined with hers. By the time I reluctantly prepared to pack up the RV and leave the shores of Seneca Lake, I felt that I had been irrevocably changed. My camera and journal were now filled with evidence of the supernatural events and the emotional journey that had defined my time there. I no longer saw the ghostly apparitions or heard the disembodied whispers that once filled the night, but I could still feel their presence in the quiet moments. The gentle rustling of leaves, the reflective gaze of the lake, and the silent nod of an ancient past finally allowed to rest. Driving away from that haunted clearing, I carried with me not only the memories of a painful legacy but also the promise of renewal. I had faced the specter of my family's past, and in doing so, had confronted my own inner demons. The healing was not instantaneous, and I knew that the journey ahead would still be fraught with moments of sorrow and uncertainty. But the experience had taught me that sometimes the most daunting ghosts are the ones we harbor within ourselves, and that only by facing them head-on can we hope to find peace. Even now, as I continue my travels across the varied landscapes of this vast country, I often find myself reflecting on those transformative days by Seneca Lake. The interplay of light and shadow, the echoes of ancient voices, and the silent grace of a spirit finally released all serve as reminders that our past, no matter how dark or painful, need not dictate our future. I have learned that healing comes not from running away from our history, but from embracing it, understanding it, and ultimately forgiving both those who came before us and ourselves. This journey, unexpected and fraught with supernatural wonder, has become a part of my story, a vivid chapter in my ongoing quest for truth and redemption. As I drive along new highways, with my camera ready and my heart open, I am ever mindful of the lessons I learned on that stormy night by the lake. The past, with all its ghosts and secrets, may linger in the corners of our memory, but it is in our power to transform that lingering sorrow into a source of strength and inspiration. My time at Seneca Lake taught me that the supernatural is often just another reflection of the human soul, a tapestry woven from threads of love, loss, regret, and hope. And so as I continue to capture the fleeting beauty of autumn skies and ancient forests, I do so with the understanding that every shadow holds a story, and every whisper in the wind is a call to remember and to heal. In the quiet moments after dusk, when the world grows soft and uncertain, I sometimes think back to that fateful encounter. I remember the look in the spectral woman's eyes, a look that was both a plea for justice and a silent farewell. I remember the way the incantation felt on my tongue, the tremor in my voice as I spoke words that had not been uttered in over a century, and the overwhelming sensation that I was part of something far greater than my own solitary pain. That night, in the heart of a raging storm, I bridged the gap between past and present, between the living and the dead, and in doing so, I found a way to let go. Now, as I drive away from that haunted place, I know that the scars of the past will remain, but they no longer define me. I have learned to see them as marks of endurance, as proof that even in the darkest hours there is a spark of light waiting to be kindled. And though I may never fully understand all the mysteries that lie beneath the surface of Seneca Lake, or the hidden truths of my family's legacy, I carry with me the quiet certainty that by facing our inner ghosts, we unlock the power to create our own future. This is my story, a tale of heartbreak, mystery, and ultimately hope. My journey through the haunted landscapes of the Finger Lakes was not simply an escape from a painful past. It was an odyssey into the very depths of my soul. And as I continue forward, camera in hand and heart unburdened, I embrace the promise that every ending is but the start of a new chapter, waiting to be written in the light of our own understanding.